The family betrayal that cost everything and my plan for ultimate legal justice. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My sister looked the opposing counsel dead in the eye and swore she built our tech company from the ground up. She had absolutely no idea I had her forged email sitting right there in my leather briefcase. We were sitting in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room for a deposition that had been 2 agonizing years in the making. Vanessa wore a bespoke designer suit paid for by the software I coded in my cramped bedroom. Next to her sat our Uncle Marcus, radiating the kind of smug arrogance that only comes from having millions of dollars and a complete lack of a moral compass. He actually checked his gold Rolex while I was sworn in, as if I were wasting his valuable time. He thought I was still the broken, naive 32-year-old kid he'd financially crushed and legally evicted from my own life 24 months ago. What they didn't know was that I hadn't spent the last 2 years crying over the millions they stole from me. I hadn't just been rotting away in a freezing basement apartment, mourning the loss of my home, my reputation, and my life savings. I had been studying. I had been planning. I had been meticulously building a perjury trap so airtight that not even Marcus's high-priced corporate lawyers would be able to save them from federal prison. "Ms. Vance," my attorney asked, his voice deceptively mild, "you maintain that your brother, Adam, had zero equity in the proprietary algorithm developed in 2022? Vanessa didn't even blink. Adam was a low-level contractor. He was compensated fairly for his minimal time. Uncle Marcus and I are the sole creators and owners of the intellectual property." I just stared at her, feeling a cold, hard-knot form in my stomach. This was the woman who taught me how to ride a bike. The woman who held my hand at our mother's funeral. Now, she was casually perjuring herself on the official record, cementing the hostile takeover that had left me literally homeless. They had exploited my blind trust, forged exit agreements, and used legal loopholes to rip a $50 million startup right out of my hands. But arrogant thieves always make one fatal mistake when they think they've won. I watched Vanessa take a confident sip of her sparkling water, completely oblivious to the fact that she was actively digging her own grave. She thought this deposition was a mere formality before they sold my life's work to a massive tech conglomerate for a 9-figure payout. She thought she had buried me so deep I'd never see daylight again. What do you do when the law protects the thief? You use the law to absolutely destroy them. I reached down and unlocked the brass clasps of my briefcase with a soft, satisfying click. I was finally ready to show my sister exactly what true legal justice looked like. To understand how we ended up in that icy deposition room, you have to understand who we were before the money poisoned everything. Vanessa and I used to be an unbreakable team. When I was just a nerdy kid tinkering with code, she was my biggest cheerleader. 5 years ago, I stumbled onto a brilliant concept for a predictive data sorting algorithm that I knew could revolutionize cloud storage efficiency. I had the technical genius, but I was practically allergic to the business side of things. That's where my older sister came in. "You build the rocket ship, Adam," Vanessa told me over cheap takeout one night in my cramped apartment. "I'll make sure we have the fuel and the launch pad. Leave the boring paperwork to me." I trusted her implicitly. Why wouldn't I? She was my blood. So, while I spent 18-hour days staring at monitors, drinking dangerous amounts of energy drinks, and bringing the software to life, Vanessa set up the LLC. She handled the legal filings, the initial cap table, and the corporate structuring. When we needed seed money to secure servers and patent filings, she brought in our Uncle Marcus. Marcus had made a fortune in real estate and loved to throw his weight around. "I'm putting in 200 grand, kid," Marcus told me, slapping my back hard enough to rattle my teeth. "We're family. We take care of our own." I was so incredibly naive. I signed the documents Vanessa put in front of me without ever consulting outside counsel. I thought hiring my own lawyer would look like an insult to my family. I poured every penny of my life savings into the venture, maxed out my credit cards, and essentially lived at the office. For 3 years, we grinded. And then, the algorithm finally worked. It didn't just work, it broke industry benchmarks. We started getting calls from massive Silicon Valley players. The valuation of our little startup skyrocketed overnight into the tens of millions. I was ecstatic, thinking our lives were changed forever for the better. I thought we had won the lottery through sheer hard work and sibling solidarity. We were celebrating in our newly leased, sleek glass office in the city's tech hub. Vanessa poured champagne, and Marcus gave a toast to the future. I remember looking at them, feeling a profound sense of pride and gratitude. I thought we were a modern-day dynasty in the making. I had no idea that the champagne I was drinking was paid for with my own stolen future. I didn't know that behind my back, the two of them had already initiated a ruthless plan to cut me out completely. The next morning, I arrived at the building and realized my nightmare had just begun. It was a Tuesday morning. I showed up at our sleek glass office downtown, coffee in hand, ready to finalize a major server patch. I swiped my keycard at the lobby turnstile. A red light flashed. Access denied. I frowned, wiped the card on my jeans, and tried again. Red light. Assuming it was a glitch, I walked over to the front desk security guard, a guy I greeted every single day. "Hey, Jim, my card's acting up," I said casually. Jim wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked incredibly uncomfortable and swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Adam. I've been instructed not to let you up. Management's orders." "Management? Jim, I am management. I'm the founder." Before he could reply, the elevator chimed. Out stepped Vanessa, flanked by two massive private security contractors and Uncle Marcus. She wasn't wearing her usual warm, sisterly smile. Her face was set in a mask of absolute, chilling indifference. Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed, looking at me like I was a beggar off the street. "Vanessa, what the hell is going on?" I demanded, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. "My card is locked out." Vanessa stepped forward and coolly handed me a thick manila envelope. "It's all in there, Adam. Your contract has been terminated. You are no longer affiliated with the company." I ripped open the envelope. Inside was a legal document titled Voluntary Equity Surrender and Exit Agreement. My eyes scanned the pages wildly. It stated that I had willingly transferred all my intellectual property rights and shares to Marcus and Vanessa for a pathetic buyout of $10,000. "I never signed this," I yelled, my voice echoing in the polished marble lobby. "This is my signature, but I never signed this document. You forged this." "Keep your voice down," Marcus growled. "You signed it last month when we restructured. You just didn't read it, kid. That's on you. You're stealing my company," I screamed, stepping toward Vanessa. The security guards instantly grabbed my arms, hauling me backward. Vanessa just looked at me with dead eyes. "Escort him off the premises," she told them flatly. "If he comes back, call the police and press trespassing charges." I was physically dragged out of the building I helped pay for, thrown onto the cold sidewalk like trash. Passers-by stared at me as I scrambled to pick up my dropped coffee cup and my pride. My brain simply couldn't process the magnitude of the betrayal. My own sister, my own uncle. They had used my trust to orchestrate a flawless, hostile corporate theft. I sat on the curb, clutching the fraudulent papers, gasping for air as panic fully set in. I had no idea that losing the company was only the first part of their plan. The next 6 months were a masterclass in psychological warfare and absolute financial ruin. I immediately tried to fight back, hiring a moderately priced lawyer with the little cash I had left in my personal checking account. But how do you fight a billionaire's legal team when your own pockets are empty? Uncle Marcus unleashed a swarm of aggressive corporate litigators who buried my attorney in thousands of pages of motions, delays, and frivolous counter-lawsuits. They drained my bank account dry within 90 days. Because my name was technically off the company accounts, I couldn't access a single dime of the startup's capital. I couldn't pay my mortgage. The bank foreclosed on my house with terrifying speed. I was forced to sell my car just to afford groceries and temporary legal fees. But the financial destruction was nothing compared to the emotional assassination my family orchestrated. When I tried to reach out to aunts, cousins, and family friends to expose what Vanessa and Marcus had done, I found that they had already planted the seeds of my destruction. Vanessa had systematically called everyone in our extended network, crying fake tears and spinning a tragic narrative. She told them the pressure of the startup had caused me to have a severe mental breakdown. "Adam is deeply unwell," she had texted my cousins, a screenshot of which was later sent to me by a guilty relative. "He's hallucinating that we stole the company. He's become erratic and dangerous. We had to let him go for his own safety. Please don't engage with his paranoid delusions." They completely gaslit me. The family closed ranks around Marcus's wealth and Vanessa's manufactured tears. Nobody believed the frantic, broke guy screaming about forged documents. They believed the polished, wealthy sister who paid for family vacations. I became an absolute pariah. When I showed up at Thanksgiving to confront them, Marcus had the police waiting at the end of the driveway to threaten me with a restraining order. I watched through the window as they ate turkey, laughing and clinking glasses, while I stood freezing in the street. I was entirely isolated. My lawyer formally dropped me, citing my inability to pay his mounting retainers. I packed my few remaining clothes into trash bags and moved into a damp, windowless basement apartment on the bad side of town. The transition from a celebrated tech CEO to a destitute outcast happened so fast, it gave me whiplash. The injustice of it all burned in my chest like swallowed acid. I was completely destroyed, but I was about to find something that would change everything. Rock bottom isn't just a metaphor. It has a very specific smell. It smells like mildew, cheap ramen noodles, and absolute despair. My new reality was a freezing, cramped basement apartment where the heater barely worked and the pipes rattled violently every time the upstairs neighbors flushed the toilet. To survive, I had to take a graveyard shift at a massive warehouse, doing mindless, grueling manual labor. The guy who had designed an algorithm worth $50 million was now hauling boxes of dog food for $15 an hour just to keep the lights on. The depression was suffocating. There were weeks where the only time I left my mattress was to go to the warehouse. I would lie awake in the dark, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, replaying the betrayal on an endless, torturous loop. I imagined storming into their office, screaming at them, demanding my life back. But reality was a cruel teacher. What do you do when the law protects the thief? I quickly realized that the universe doesn't care about fairness. In the real world, the justice system is just a machine, and money is the oil that keeps it running. Screaming, "It's not fair," into the void means absolutely nothing in a court of law. A judge doesn't care about your broken heart or your sister's betrayal. A judge only cares about what can be proven on paper. And on paper, Vanessa and Marcus had outplayed me flawlessly. They had weaponized my trust and turned it into an ironclad legal defense. I knew that if I stayed angry, I would die in this basement. Anger is an exhausting emotion, and it was draining the little energy I had left. So, I made a conscious, terrifying choice to kill the naive, trusting brother I used to be. I replaced the burning rage with a cold, calculated, and obsessive focus. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need a family intervention. I needed to understand the weapon they used against me better than they did. I began spending every free minute I had at the public library, aggressively studying corporate law, contract disputes, and fraud statutes. I read through endless volumes of case law until my eyes blurred. I printed out the fraudulent exit agreement Vanessa had handed me and taped it to my basement wall. I stared at it for hundreds of hours, looking for a crack in their armor. They thought I was beaten, but I was just adapting to the dark. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I finally spotted their fatal mistake. It was 3 a.m. on a miserable Tuesday. The basement was freezing, and I was huddled under a cheap blanket, illuminated only by the harsh glare of a single desk lamp. I was staring at the voluntary equity surrender and exit agreement pinned to my wall for the 1,000th time. I knew every word, every comma, and every forged signature by heart. But on this night, exhausted and running on cheap instant coffee, my eyes drifted away from the text and landed on the bottom corner of the final page. There it was, the notary public stamp. It was a standard ink stamp, sealing my supposed signature to make the document legally binding. I had looked at it endlessly, assuming Vanessa had just bribed a shady notary to stamp the forgery. But then I looked closer at the tiny, faded date pressed into the paper. October 14th. My heart stopped dead in my chest. October 14th. I scrambled to my laptop, my hands shaking so violently I could barely type my password. I logged into my old, personal email account, the only one they hadn't been able to seize, and frantically searched for my flight itineraries from 2 years ago. I pulled up the PDF of a digital boarding pass and stared at the screen, letting out a sharp, breathless laugh that sounded almost manic in the quiet room. On October 14th, the exact date the notary certified that I had supposedly stood in front of them in our home city, handed over my ID, and signed away my company, I was not in the United States. I was in Tokyo, Japan, attending a massive tech summit to pitch our algorithm to Asian markets. I had the flight records, the hotel receipts, and the conference badges to prove it. The document was a physical impossibility. Vanessa and Marcus had been so eager to backdate the paperwork to lock me out before our valuation exploded that they had gotten sloppy. They hadn't checked my travel schedule. It was a tiny, microscopic flaw in their otherwise perfect legal armor. But a tiny flaw is all you need to shatter a pane of glass. If the notary stamp was demonstrably false, the entire exit agreement was void. But more importantly, submitting a forged, falsely notarized document to a court during my initial, failed lawsuit wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. It was a felony. It was blatant perjury and fraud upon the court. I had the spark to burn their empire to the ground, but I knew I couldn't light the fire alone. I needed someone inside the legal system who was willing to play dirty. I grabbed my coat and headed straight for the cheapest legal aid clinic in town. The community legal clinic smelled like old coffee and desperate people. I sat in a wobbly plastic chair until I was finally called back to see Sam. Sam was a 40-something paralegal who looked like he hadn't slept a full 8 hours in a decade. He had permanent dark circles, a messy tie, and an incredibly cynical aura. He listened to my story with an expression of sheer boredom, clearly used to crazy people walking in with wild conspiracy theories. But then I slid the forged contract and my Tokyo flight records across his cluttered desk. Sam stopped chewing his pen. He picked up the documents, compared the dates, and then looked up at me, his eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "Well, I'll be damned," Sam muttered, leaning back in his creaky chair. "They actually slipped up. This is a provable forgery." "Exactly," I said, leaning forward. "So we take this to the police, right? Or file a new lawsuit to get my company back?" Sam laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Kid, you do that, and Marcus's lawyers will claim it was a clerical error. They'll throw the notary under the bus, say the date was just stamped wrong by mistake, and drag you in civil court for another 5 years until you're completely bankrupt. Proving historical fraud isn't enough when you're fighting this kind of money." "Then what do?" I asked, feeling the spark of hope threatening to die. "We don't fight them in the past. We bring the crime into the present," Sam said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "We need to catch them committing perjury and wire fraud now. We need to put them in a position where they are legally forced to swear, under oath and in front of witnesses, that this specific document is authentic and that no other claims exist. If they lie under oath to secure a financial transaction, the FBI steps in. Marcus's fancy lawyers can't protect him from a federal criminal indictment." Sam agreed to help me off the clock. He hated arrogant billionaires almost as much as I did. We started meeting at diners late at night, turning my basement wall into a sprawling, chaotic conspiracy board of sticky notes and legal statutes. Sam had access to legal databases and knew exactly how to navigate the murky waters of corporate shell companies. We weren't just going to sue them. We were going to build an inescapable psychological and legal trap. We were going to make their greed be the exact thing that destroys them. To catch the rats, we had to build a very expensive piece of bait. For the next 8 months, I essentially lived 2 lives. By day, I was the exhausted warehouse worker, keeping my head down and surviving on the absolute bare minimum. By night, I was a digital ghost, working alongside Sam to meticulously build our trap. Because I had written the core architecture of the company's server network, I knew exactly where the digital backdoors were, the ones Vanessa and Marcus had been too technically illiterate to close. I didn't hack them. I just utilized legacy admin credentials they never bothered to revoke. I spent hours silently sweeping through their corporate servers, gathering a massive archive of hidden digital footprints. I downloaded internal emails, financial spreadsheets, and server logs. I established a flawless chain of evidence showing exactly when I wrote the code, proving my sole authorship of the proprietary algorithm. During one of these late-night digital sweeps, I stumbled onto the motherlode. I intercepted an encrypted email thread between Vanessa and a massive, multinational tech conglomerate based in Seattle. My jaw dropped as I read the numbers on the screen. Marcus and Vanessa weren't just running the company. They were aggressively trying to sell it. The tech giant had offered a staggering $120 million to acquire my algorithm. The emails revealed that the conglomerate was currently in the final stages of due diligence. They were extremely risk-averse and were demanding absolute, ironclad proof that the intellectual property was clean. They wanted guaranteed assurances that no former founders or contractors had any lingering legal claims to the software before they wired the 9-figure payout. "This is it," I told Sam, calling him at 2 in the morning. "They are trying to cash out. They are weeks away from finalizing the sale." "Perfect," Sam said, his voice crackling over the phone. "This is exactly the leverage we need. If they want that money, they'll do whatever it takes to satisfy the buyer. Their greed is blinding them to the risk." We knew we couldn't just warn the Seattle conglomerate. Marcus would just spin it as a crazy ex-employee making noise. We had to inject ourselves directly into the transaction without them ever knowing it was me. We needed to create a scenario where Vanessa and Marcus would willingly, greedily commit a fresh, undeniable act of felony fraud on the official record. I stared at the leaked email thread, my mind racing with possibilities. We were going to use their impending mega deal as the very anvil we'd smash them against. Sam and I immediately got to work creating the ultimate corporate Trojan horse. Setting up a dummy corporation is surprisingly easy if you have a rogue paralegal walking you through the loopholes. Using a few $1,000s I had painstakingly saved, Sam helped me register a shell company out of Delaware called Capital Holdings. We paid for a sleek, professional website, rented a virtual office address in a high-end financial district, and set up a labyrinth of forwarded phone numbers. We made Aegis look like a highly aggressive, boutique private equity firm specializing in tech acquisitions. Once the facade was perfectly in place, we launched the bait. Posing as the fictional managing partner of Aegis, Sam drafted an official, legally binding letter of intent and emailed it directly to Uncle Marcus. We offered to buy the company for $150 million, a full $30 million higher than the Seattle conglomerate's offer. It was a phantom offer, completely fabricated, but it was a number so astronomically high that we knew Marcus's greed wouldn't let him ignore it. Within 24 hours, Marcus took the bait. He replied to Sam's alias, eager to open immediate negotiations. Over the next week, Sam played the role of the cutthroat investor perfectly via phone and email. He strung them along, building their excitement, until he finally dropped the hammer. Aegis is ready to fast-track this acquisition, Sam told Marcus during a recorded conference call. However, our risk assessment team flagged a minor historical anomaly regarding a former partner named Adam. Before we wire any escrow funds, we require a newly signed, sworn affidavit from your executive team. You must guarantee, under penalty of perjury, that Adam's exit was fully legally compliant and that the original exit agreement is absolutely authentic. I sat next to Sam in his messy living room, listening to the call on speakerphone, barely daring to breathe. If Marcus balked, the plan failed. But Marcus didn't hesitate. The scent of $150 million had completely overpowered his common sense. Not a problem at all, Marcus chuckled smoothly. Adam was a minor contractor. We have the ironclad, original, notarized documents to prove it. We'll sign whatever affidavit you need to close this deal. I smiled, a cold, dark expression that felt entirely foreign on my face. They were so blinded by the massive payday that they were blindly walking right into the center of the minefield. They thought they were securing their golden parachute. They didn't realize they were tying their own noose. All I had to do now was wait for the fraudulent ink to dry. 3 days later, a FedEx package arrived at our virtual office Dropbox. Sam brought the heavy envelope back to my basement, and we opened it together. Inside were the newly drafted, heavily legally binding affidavits demanded by our fake company, Aegis Capital. I laid the thick, crisp pages out on my cheap folding table, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until I found the signature lines at the very bottom. There it was. Uncle Marcus and Vanessa had both signed their names in bold blue ink. Right above their signatures was a terrifyingly clear clause. The undersigned swear, under penalty of perjury and wire fraud statutes, that the original voluntary equity surrender agreement dated October 14th is a true, authentic, and legally executed document, and that no other party holds legitimate claim to the intellectual property. They had actually done it. They had formally verified a forged document across state lines via a digital and physical communication network to secure a financial transaction. "Gotcha," Sam whispered, tapping the signatures with his pen. "This isn't just a civil dispute anymore, Adam. This is a slam-dunk federal crime. They just committed wire fraud and perjury on a completely new, active document. The statute of limitations just reset, and their liability is absolute. I stared at Vanessa's signature. I thought I would feel a sense of triumph, but honestly, I just felt a deep, chilling disgust. My own sister was so eager to secure her stolen millions that she willingly committed a felony without a second thought. She had completely erased our entire childhood, our shared struggles, and our blood tie for a payout. It solidified my resolve. Any lingering guilt I had about destroying her life completely vanished in that damp basement. So, we hand this over to the FBI now? I asked, looking up at Sam. Not yet, Sam said, his eyes gleaming with a vindictive light. If we just hand it over, they get arrested quietly. Their lawyers will spin it, delay it, and hide it from the public. No, we want maximum destruction. We want to humiliate them. We want to trap them in a room where they can't run, can't spin, and have to face you directly when the hammer drops. We decided to use the court system as our stage. We needed a formal, undeniable legal setting where their lies would be recorded by a court stenographer, making the perjury trap absolutely inescapable. I was about to step out of the shadows and back into their lives like a ghost seeking vengeance. It was time to file the lawsuit that would finally bring them to their knees. With Sam's brilliant, off-the-books drafting, I officially filed a massive, highly specific civil lawsuit against Vanessa and Uncle Marcus. I didn't sue them for a vague sum of money. I sued them for declaratory judgment of fraudulent conveyance and immediate restitution of intellectual property. We timed the filing perfectly. We dropped the lawsuit on their desk just 2 weeks before they were scheduled to close the real $120 million deal with the Seattle tech conglomerate. When the process server handed them the papers at their sleek corporate headquarters, I could only imagine their reactions. According to a former colleague who secretly texted me, Marcus laughed out loud in the lobby. He genuinely thought it was a pathetic, desperate Hail Mary from a broke, defeated kid. He's trying to extort a settlement before we sell, Marcus reportedly told the executive board. Let the lawyers crush him again. He doesn't have a dime to his name. They immediately filed a motion to dismiss, citing the original forged contract as absolute proof that I had no standing. But Sam had anticipated that. We had embedded just enough plausible cause in our filing to force an emergency discovery phase before the judge would rule on the dismissal. The judge, seeing the high-stakes nature of the impending corporate sale, ordered an immediate, emergency deposition to resolve the dispute. Marcus and Vanessa were annoyed, but not scared. They thought they were just going to sit in a room, slap down the forged document, call me crazy on the record, and go back to counting their millions. They were so incredibly arrogant that they didn't even bring their senior litigation team to the deposition. They just brought a junior partner, assuming it would be a quick, 30-minute slaughter. They had no idea that the lawsuit was completely irrelevant. I didn't care about winning the civil case. The civil case was just the delivery mechanism to force them into a room, put them under oath, and get them to lie to a court reporter. The morning of the deposition, I put on my only clean suit. It was a little baggy, smelling faintly of the basement, but I didn't care. I packed my leather briefcase with the flight records, the Aegis emails, and the freshly signed, fraudulent affidavits. I walked out of the freezing basement for what I promised myself would be the last time. I walked into the conference room and saw my family for the first time in years. Which brings us right back to that sterile, wood-paneled conference room. Marcus was checking his gold Rolex, radiating smug annoyance, while Vanessa calmly sipped her sparkling water, wearing her bespoke designer suit. I sat directly across from them, my hands resting flat on the table, feeling a strange, absolute calm wash over me. The court stenographer sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her machine, ready to capture every single word. My attorney, a sharp, hungry lawyer Sam had recruited specifically for this moment, started with the basics. He established their identities, their roles in the company, and the nature of the software. Then, he moved in for the kill. Mr. Vance, my lawyer said, looking at Marcus, I'd like to present Exhibit A. This is the Voluntary Equity Surrender and Exit Agreement dated October 14th. Do you recognize this document? Of course, Marcus sighed, rolling his eyes. Adam signed it in front of a notary. He surrendered his shares. We've been over this. And you swear, under oath today, that this document is 100% authentic? That it was not altered or forged in any way? Marcus leaned forward, a nasty sneer on his face. Yes, it is entirely authentic. Adam is a bitter, unstable young man trying to shake us down. My lawyer turned to my sister. Ms. Vance, do you corroborate that statement? You swear under oath that Adam was present in your office on October 14th to sign this document? Vanessa looked me dead in the eye, her expression completely devoid of any sibling affection or guilt. I do. I was there. I saw him sign it. The notary saw him sign it. It's time for Adam to move on and stop harassing this family. I let her words hang in the air. The stenographer's machine clacked loudly in the silent room, officially cementing their lies into the legal record. They had just committed perjury. The trap had officially snapped shut. They had confidently doubled down on their fraud, completely unaware that the floor was about to drop out from underneath them. I looked at Marcus's smug face and Vanessa's cold, unblinking eyes. I remembered the nights I spent crying in that freezing basement, wondering why I wasn't enough for my own family. I remembered the hunger, the humiliation, and the absolute despair. All of that pain crystallized into a sharp, weaponized focus. I nodded slowly at my attorney. It was time to show them the monsters they had truly been negotiating with. My lawyer casually reached into his briefcase and pulled out a fresh stack of papers. That's fascinating, Ms. Vance. Because I'd like to introduce Exhibit B, official flight itineraries, Japanese custom stamps, and hotel receipts proving my client, Adam, was in Tokyo, Japan, on October 14th. The junior partner sitting next to Marcus suddenly sat up perfectly straight. Marcus frowned, his smug expression faltering for a split second. It is physically impossible for Adam to have signed that document in your office, my lawyer continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room. This contract is a provable forgery, backdated poorly by someone who forgot to check my client's international travel schedule. Vanessa's hand froze halfway to her water glass. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor started in her fingers. Furthermore, my lawyer said, pulling out a second, thicker file, we'd like to introduce Exhibit C. Internal communications from the dummy corporation Aegis Capital Holdings, a company wholly owned and operated by my client. The silence in the room became absolutely deafening. Marcus's face turned a violent, splotchy shade of red. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He stared at the Aegis logo on the paper, realizing the horrifying truth. You see, my lawyer smiled ruthlessly, when you signed those affidavits last week guaranteeing the clean title of the company to Aegis Capital, you weren't communicating with an eager investor. You were communicating with Adam. You used interstate wires to transmit a fraudulent guarantee based on a forged document. You just confessed, on the official record, to felony wire fraud. I watched the exact moment the realization hit my sister. The color violently drained from Vanessa's face, leaving her looking like a pale, terrified ghost. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into the mahogany table. The arrogant, untouchable CEO mask completely shattered. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, overwhelming panic. She wasn't looking at the broken little brother she had easily manipulated anymore. She was looking at the man who had just systematically engineered her complete legal and financial destruction. The junior partner frantically began packing his briefcase, aggressively whispering to Marcus that they needed to terminate the deposition immediately. But it was far too late. The stenographer had recorded every single damning word. The evidence was officially submitted. I simply smiled at my sister, knowing the FBI was already reviewing the transcripts. The legal hammer didn't just drop, it completely leveled their lives. Within 48 hours of the deposition, the Seattle conglomerate caught wind of the perjury and completely pulled out of the acquisition, immediately killing the $120 million deal. A week later, the federal indictments came down. Armed FBI agents walked into the sleek glass office that I had helped build and publicly escorted Uncle Marcus and Vanessa out in handcuffs for multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and perjury. Because the exit agreement was proven to be a malicious forgery, a civil judge swiftly granted an emergency injunction. The fraudulent transfer of my shares was entirely voided. The court legally stripped them of their equity and handed the company, and its algorithm, right back to me. All of Marcus's corporate assets and bank accounts were immediately frozen pending the federal investigation. The most satisfying part wasn't getting my company back. It was watching the family dynamic entirely implode. The moment they realized they were facing genuine federal prison time, the unbreakable family loyalty vanished instantly. They turned on each other like starving wolves. Marcus's defense team aggressively claimed that Vanessa was the sole mastermind, that she had forged the documents without his knowledge and tricked him into signing the Aegis affidavits. Vanessa retaliated by weeping to the prosecutors, claiming Marcus was a domineering tyrant who forced her to steal from her own brother. The aunts, cousins, and relatives who had previously gaslit me and called me crazy suddenly started calling my phone nonstop. They left frantic, apologetic voicemails, claiming they always knew something was wrong and begging to reconnect now that I was a multi-millionaire CEO again. I didn't answer a single call. I simply blocked every single one of their numbers, permanently severing the toxic roots of my family tree. I walked back into my company lobby, my keycard working perfectly this time. Jim, the security guard, looked terrified, thinking I would fire him on the spot. I just gave him a polite nod and stepped into the elevator. I had my life back, but the victory felt incredibly heavy. The war was finally over, but I knew I would never be the same person again. It has been a year since the deposition. Vanessa recently accepted a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, resulting in a 3-year sentence in a minimum security federal facility. Uncle Marcus is currently fighting his charges, draining the last of his unfrozen personal funds on desperate lawyers, looking older and more pathetic every time I see him in the news. As for me, I sold the algorithm to the Seattle conglomerate for an incredible sum, ensuring I will never have to worry about money or freezing basement apartments ever again. I am back in the CEO chair, but I am fundamentally changed. The naive, trusting kid who thought blood meant loyalty died in that damp basement. I learned the hardest lesson of my life. Toxic people will absolutely use your love, your trust, and your sense of family obligation as weapons to destroy you. They rely on the fact that you will be too emotional, too hurt, or too forgiving to fight back with the same level of ruthlessness. If there is any advice I can give to someone dealing with a catastrophic family betrayal, it is this: put your emotions in a box and lock it tight. Screaming, crying, and begging for closure will get you nowhere. True justice doesn't come from a dramatic argument at the Thanksgiving dinner table. True justice requires cold, hard patience. It requires you to educate yourself, to understand the rules of the game they are playing, and to meticulously build a trap that they cannot escape. I still have moments of profound sadness. I mourn the sister I thought I had, and I grieve the family I lost. But then I look around my beautiful new home, securely held in a bulletproof trust, and I feel an overwhelming sense of peace. I survived the absolute worst they could throw at me. I didn't just beat them. I used the exact system they weaponized against me to legally erase them from my life. I hired Sam, the cynical paralegal, to be my new chief compliance officer, paying him 5 times what he made at the clinic. We still grab coffee and talk about the case sometimes. It serves as a permanent reminder to always read the fine print, trust nobody blindly, and remember that karma is rarely a natural occurrence. Sometimes, karma requires a massive, expertly crafted lawsuit to finally do its job.